Thank you for joining us for this episode of Springdale Today. I'm your host, Mary Jordan. Today we're at Tyson School of Innovation and we're chatting with teachers Eric Ball and Marian Hendrickson. We're going to be discussing the educating on complex historical topics such as September 11th. Eric and Marian will help us understand how the district teaches on such significant moments in American history, which many teachers witnessed in person or through the media as events occurred. September 11th, 2001, often called 9/11, was the date of a coordinated terrorist attack on the United States that became one of the most significant events in modern history. 19 members of the extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial passenger planes, leading to events that resulted in the deaths of nearly 3,000 people, including first responders, passengers, and civilians. It remains the deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil. And on that very heavy note, thank you guys for both joining us today. We're very grateful for you guys to talk to us a little bit about how we educate students on such significant topics in American history.
Thank you for having me.
Now, September 11th is one of those days where I often kind of think about like the JFK assassination, where people go, where were you at that day? What was happening with you? Do you guys recall what was going on in your lives and where you were at on that day?
For me, it might be a lot like a lot of the students I had because I was around that age. I was 5th grade, so middle school. The main thing I remember was all the teachers being distracted because they heard about it, but they didn't really tell us. So they were all having hallway meetings all day and like not really focused on teaching, understandably. So that was like my school day when it happened. Then I walked home and I remember my dad was watching the news. He seemed really kind of freaked out, and he was saying like we might be going to war. He seemed really worried, and that obviously made it a bigger deal for me. And then it kind of clicked. Oh, that's probably what my teachers were all talking about in the hallway. And that's kind of all I remember about the day itself.
What about you, Mary?
So I'm a lot older than Mr. Ball, and I was actually here in Springdale District when it happened. I was an intern. It was my very first day in the classroom by myself. I know, my mentor teacher, she had to go pick her daughter up at the airport. She was coming in from someplace, and of course her daughter didn't make it in that day. But I was standing there, and I was talking to, it was a psychology class, and I was talking to her psychology class, and a couple doors down, Mr. Grow was the teacher down the hall, and Miss Bachman, who was the teacher I was with, and Mr. Grow were really good friends. And I remember hearing his door slam open really loud and him coming down the hall and yelling her name and then just walking into the room and flipping on the old Channel 1 TV that we had at the top of in the room. It was a little bitty TV. And them showing the tower having been hit. And that was my first memory of what happened. And then he proceeded to tell me and the entire class, because it was all, seniors, juniors and seniors, and what happened. And, throughout the day, the rest of the events came in. And since I had high school kids, we were probably a little more cognizant, and the high school kids could see what was happening. Other teachers had told them, and they could listen to it on their radios in their cars or whatever. I also remember trying to go home and the gas stations being all lined out, because people were trying to buy gas as I was going home. And I thought, I can honestly be naive and go, I don't understand why they're doing that. Like, it didn't make any sense to me. By the time I got home, I kind of had figured it out, but the initial was, I don't understand what was going on. But, I guess already being a history teacher and already being, starting in the classroom, I kind of was, especially with juniors and seniors in the room, a little more cognizant of the idea that there might be a war that follows. There might be military action, and some of the kids that I had in class or that were in Miss Bachman's class might be headed towards military service like that. So yeah, that was one of the things that kind of settled into my brain as I went back to school the next day.
Yeah, I was working on what was then Elmendorf Air Force Base, and working in a marketing office. So I was not essential personnel, but the installation shut down. I was asleep, and my sister called from the lower 48, telling me what was going on, and turned on the TV and just sat there with the kids and just watched it all unfold. But the base was shut down, and kids weren't going to school, and we just kind of hunkered down for a few days up there. So where do you guys find yourself then now as teachers?
So just like what I teach and stuff. I'm an 8th grade history teacher, so that is the period of U.S. history from 1850 to 1930, which covers like the lead up to the Civil War all the way up to right after World War I. So I don't quite get to modern or 9/11, but the class they have the next year, if they take U.S. history the next year, would cover 9/11. And I've been teaching for not very long time, 3 years. It's my second career, so I haven't been teaching for as long as Miss Hendrickson. So yeah.
I've been teaching a long time. I'm like 24, 25 somewhere. I'm not even sure which one of those it is anymore. But I teach 10th grade history, and so that's world history. But I also teach concurrent here at SOI for NWAC. So I teach the kids that are taking the college class in high school. And so I teach US 1, which is beginning to 1877, so right after Reconstruction. And then I teach world history, which is 1450 to present, and then I teach the same class in regular history here, 10th grade history, as world history is like 1450 to present.
So what influenced your desires to be history teachers? Did events such as September 11th influence that at all?
As far as teaching in general, I just thought it would be a more fulfilling kind of career than what I had before. Like any sort of job where you're helping people feels nice, feels more fulfilling. But like the topic I picked, history over math or science or whatever, has more to do with that, because I kind of like in my own life just like understanding why things are the way they are, not on like a science sense, like why gravity, but like on a like why society is, why people, cultures, and things like 9/11 are a big reason for a lot of that. Any big event you can point like, oh, this caused things to be this way, this caused things to be that way. So not just 9/11, but all big events kind of play a part in that, and I find that really interesting, and I think that's something I want to hopefully get kids interested about.
Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Marian?
I would say big events, yes and a no. My grandmother ran a beauty shop in Russellville, and by the time I met people in the beauty shop, they were all the older ladies in the community in Russellville, and she had like the shop that all the older ladies went to. And so I remember being there all the time and listening to them tell stories, where they were when Kennedy was shot, or where they were when Elvis died, or, the moon landing, or, all these different stories. And they would tell me stories all the time. And so, and they would like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And they'd always ask my opinion, even though I was like, sometimes like a 6 or 7 year old, but they would still listen to me. And of course I was the age of some of their grandkids, but it helped me kind of appreciate history, and it helped me appreciate how those big events shaped what was going on. And so someone that's interested in talking to these women, and listening to the stories that they had in their oral histories that they would tell me, about the town of Russellville, about Arkansas in general, politics, you name it. How beauty shops are, everything's discussed there. So it was kind of that idea. And as I got older, I appreciated what they had talked about when I was younger. And of course, my grandmother gave up her shop when I was about 13 years old. So, from that point on, it was me looking in history books or listening to different groups. And I started with the Arkansas Archaeological Society and doing archaeological digs and things like that, just because I thought it was interesting. So that's where, I started with things. So.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It really does sound like a lot of fun and really cool stories to get to experience. When we're talking about subjects and topics like September 11th, are there requirements to teach on them? What are the expectations from the Arkansas Department of Education?
So as long as I'm aware, feel free to correct me, but it's not, 9/11 specifically isn't state required, but we have the Freedom Week and Constitution Day that are around the same time in September. So in Freedom Week, that's something where we would be sure to mention 9/11, although of course on the day of 9/11 too, we'll mention it. And sometimes we'll do different things. Sometimes they'll have us like just do it as part of a lesson for the day. Other times they've had us get not last year, but the year before last, we all the middle school met in a hub and watched one of the documentaries. So they do make us do something in this building, and I know in the district as a whole, they want us to at least do something during Freedom Week involved with 9/11.
The high school standards, it's a mentioned event in American history, so one of the suggested topics that you cover in the end section of American history. So it's in there with a whole bunch of different events, but it's one of the events that I suggest you cover. But that's aside from Freedom Week and 9/11. That's pretty much it. So.
How do you guys decide what to incorporate into the lessons? Do you get to shape that in any way as well?
For me, it's been kind of different. Kind of like I said, there was one year where we kind of all got together, all the middle school teachers, and we did one thing where we kind of did what we did. We shared our experience and then watched a documentary. Last year, we didn't do that, so we kind of just all individually, maybe by grade. I know me and the other 8th grade teacher sat down and said what kind of we wanted to do. And all the other grades, I'm sure, had their own thing they did. So that was more on an individual basis. I'm not sure what high school did.
The high school kind of does what like an individual basis, but I generally, since I teach the last year that they have a required history class, they've heard about 9/11 several times. So I kind of will ask them, what do you know about it? You know, explain to me what you guys know. What are the general conceptions and things that you have, you know, and then I have several options for them if they want to learn more about things. So if you want to learn more about this section of it, go here. Here's some resources. You can look at it. If you want to learn more about the, you know, and so I've got different sections of resources that they can go and investigate a little bit more if they find something interesting. I do try to show, National Geographic has a really neat little video that they show how the buildings buckled and what happened as the planes went in, and it's an actually like interesting like show of it. So I generally show that to them. It's like, it's not real long, but it's interesting for the kids because they've never actually seen like the plane and how it went in and where it was and why it blocked the stairs and the fires and things like that. So kind of interesting.
And your whole jobs is helping youth relate to something that chances are they weren't even alive for, right? I mean, not just this event, but history in general. How do you help them really relate to events that they weren't alive for?
I think one good way to do it is kind of what Ms. Hendrickson mentioned earlier a little bit, how she talked to these older folk that had stories. So, of course, all kids have their parents, their grandparents that were all alive. So I always encourage them, like, go home, ask your parent what they were doing during 9/11. I'm sure they would get real excited and enjoy telling you, you know. Same with their grandparents or older siblings. I also think trying to connect it to them somehow. So obviously a big obvious one is, have you ever rode on a plane, you know? And then you can talk about TSA and how that kind of came, like security. It used to be a lot easier to get on a plane before. So that's something they can kind of be like, oh, that's why that is how it is. And then finally, I think things that'll like give them an emotional kind of trigger. So obviously, you don't want to get too graphic with middle schoolers, but just the planes hitting, I think that looks kind of crazy when you're a little kid. It almost looks like it's out of a movie, but it's like real. So giving them some sort of emotional kind of thing to look at would make them it stick with them a little more.
I always try to relate it back to their household and their family. Just history in general, it doesn't matter what topic it is. If you can relate it back to something that they understand, that they deal with every day, that, you know, is an event that's happened in their own lives, they're much more likely to get the meaning of the topic or the meaning of the event. And so I generally use COVID to help with 9/11. It's something that shut down everything, and that's exactly what happened with 9/11. Everything seemed to shut down for like a day, at least. And the airport shut down for more than that. But it was like, you know, and all the people going out and buying all this stuff and like the gasoline. And so I was like, it was a shorter term, but it had a longer lasting effect, just like COVID did. It was a short term, but it had a longer lasting effect and things. And so trying to get them to make those connections between how events have that ripple effect or have that. So that's a high school difference. We're trying to get them to make those far-reaching connections. So we generally try to show that topic and how it passed down, you know, from one section to another.
How do you guys help students go through information and make sure that they have sound information, avoiding things like conspiracy theories, but actually getting the facts that surround history?
I know for me, one of my big goals as a history teacher is to improve their media literacy and to expose them to sources with everything I teach. So hopefully, just outside of 9/11, everything they've learned in my class has helped them with that. And then for 9/11, of course, anytime I teach on that, it would be sources they could trust, like actual primary videos of it happening. I like to use the 9/11 Memorial Museum website. They always come with a documentary, like every year. I think they update it, and it always involves like interviews with people that were there. And then we can talk about that, like people that were there, actual primary sources. That's going to be more reliable than some like kind of clickbait, more conspiracy kind of thing like that. So that's kind of my intentions towards that.
Yeah, I use the 9/11 museum, but I also use the news broadcast from the time period. So like, big stations, NBC or something like that, and I'll play some of their broadcasts or show them some of their broadcasts, or if they're wanting to go even further into that, there's, Chronicling America has like huge newspaper articles that you can go and look at and things like that for it. And I always show them things that were from other places in the world. I'm a world history teacher, so I show them other places in the world, and they're reporting back on 9/11. So the British Broadcasting Company and what they reported back, or some of the other news companies that are around, and I'll put out some of their broadcasts so they can see not just our perspective but a global perspective of what was going on and how the entire world was like, oh my gosh, and it wasn't just America that was feeling that pain and all of that, but it was the entire world that was like, America needs our support at this moment because this is a total tragedy and we should all try to help and support them. And I kind of think that was it's a nice thing to show them. So
thank you for sharing that with us. We're here at Don Tyson School of Innovation visiting with teachers Eric Ball and Marian Hendrickson, who are discussing how the district handles teaching on significant historical topics such as 9/11. Now, how do you guys approach it when you're talking with younger students versus older students, and when you're talking graphic content? Because there's a lot of material that's involved with 9/11 that could be disturbing. So how do you have those conversations in such a way that they're educational and not necessarily inspiring fear in kids?
Yeah. So I kind of think it's good to have a little bit of something that would kind of hit them, give them some sort of emotional response, but obviously not going too far. Like I said earlier, like, I probably would not show videos of people, jumping or inside the building or anything super graphic. But, I think like the planes hitting it, like I mentioned earlier, would be like a really shocking thing to see, but not like traumatizing. So kind of like, I think a little bit of something that's a little shocking to like make you remember it and like form a memory for you, but nothing too graphic, especially for younger kids. Maybe when they're older, they can see more of the more graphic things.
I tend to spend a little more time on the aftermath and like the first responders and some of that and some of what they went through, and it's a little more heart-wrenching in that way because some of them, years and years later are having health problems because of it. But I also like to show them how quickly, the entire city pulled together to try and help. And I think that's a useful bit of information for them to see what it looked like and what the aftermath was, even after the buildings came down, what the people did, the outpouring that was there. So.
How do you guys encourage your students to ask questions about history, 9/11, or just anything that inspires them that they want to know more about, that they want to understand more about?
You want to go first on this one?
Sure. So I teach two different kind of classes. I teach a college class, which very much ask them to do their own research and things and write, on a topic that they want to know about. We have a research project and we write on it, and so that we can look in this. And I've had topics all over the place, but they have to choose something in American history. In my world history class, it's much more of me asking a question and then asking them, explain to me, and then asking them to further investigate and ask their own questions. So I'll start it with a question or start it with a topic and then ask them to research and ask their own questions on something. And I think it's freeing for kids to be able to ask their own questions on a topic and research a topic that they want to know about. So when I do 9/11, that's why I give them options of where you want to look at it, what topic is most interesting to you.
Yeah, I think if a student asks me some topic they're interested in, hopefully I would be knowledgeable enough to send them in the direction of whatever book or maybe podcast even, or even a YouTube video or just different resources. But I think it'd be good for them just to explore different things. Even if some of it isn't as great a source as others, then that kind of helps them learn, right? You know, like this TikTok video I watched might not be the best source, but it was interesting. And then when I compared it to this, you know, actual scholastic or academic article I read, like it was some of it was true, some of it wasn't. So even being able to make that comparison from different sources that might not be as reliable is good. So I'd say just like try to make them more curious and go find things on their own, but be able to give them the more academic stuff where they can compare and kind of figure out things on their own.
And what about aspects of history that show the human nature of resiliency or civic responsibility? How do you work some of those conversations in when you look at the bigger picture of 9/11 and how people showed up throughout it or showed up throughout COVID?
I tend towards unity. I like the message. I think as we've become more divided as a nation, I want that message of unity there even more so. So I try to pull that aspect to things. And I do talk about civic responsibility, especially Remembrance Freedom Week. But I like the idea of unity, especially because during that time, it did bring the entire country together. And we all had one focus, and we all were, you know, looking at this and looking to those families and trying to support them. And even the larger global community, it was very much, you know, we want to support you. And I like that idea. I think that's a positive idea for our students to see. So.
Yeah, I really like that too. That's one of my core memories of 9/11 was right after you suddenly saw American flags everywhere, all down the street. I remember President Bush, the president at the time, his approval rating went way up. It was something crazy, like 70 or 80% or something. Like that would never happen today, you know, like, or it'd be very rare if it happened today. But I remember everyone was pretty unified. It was this patriotic sense. Wasn't really super similar to COVID, although COVID had its own like stories of heroism and stuff. Those 9/11 museum documentaries, they always have these stories of heroism from different people. And you could do the same thing with COVID. You could have stories of nurses or whoever, first responders, helping with different things. So I think that's an important aspect to focus on. Like when there's hard times, the way people act is super impactful, and that could be you someday, you know? So even if things aren't good, that's opportunities to like really shine as a better person and, you know, do these things these other really important heroic people did in the past.
Very cool. Now, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important to bring to the conversation?
At the moment, that's all I can think of that we covered it all.
We appreciate your being with us. We appreciate your talking with us today, making us a little bit smarter on these topics. You can catch this and previous episodes of Springdale Today on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, your favorite podcast app. Thank you for joining us for this conversation, and we look forward to chatting with you next time on Springdale Today.
Springdale Today is a production of the Springdale Public Schools Communications Office.
The podcast is hosted by Mary Jordan and is produced and edited by Micah DeLacy.
Be sure to subscribe to Springdale Today for free on your favorite podcast platform.
And don't forget to follow Springdale Today on social media for episode updates
and behind-the-scenes conversations.
Thank you for listening. We hope you join us in the future as we continue to learn about the amazing stories happening in Springdale today.